Hey Internet, we're here today to talk about this term you've probably heard many, many times called hyperscale. You know, that wasn't a very common word just a few years ago, and a lot of people think it means a variety of things. I'm going to take a shot at it, describing it to you today. We're going to have a good time with this. But before we get into that, let's back up a little bit. It's 1999, circa 2000, just before the dot-com burst. And there is one of the largest, most successful online merchants in the world that has an idea. They want to offer up their infrastructure to third-party e-commerce sites. Sounds easy, right? No, not easy. Because when they went to put this program together, what they discovered was their own infrastructure was completely tangled. One group didn't understand what the other group was doing. There wasn't a lot of communication, very little elasticity, very little efficiency, no visibility, no control. You get the picture. Not unlike most entrepreneurial organizations that dive in and just go out and make business. But here's what's remarkable. When they came to that conclusion, instead of just abandoning their business plan, they stepped back, took a look at their infrastructure, unwound the whole thing over the next 3 years, and rebuilt it again. How'd they do it? Magic. Magic! That's right. In the interwebs, magic comes in the form of APIs. So I'm not going to get into a bunch of detail about what an API is. You can go look that up for yourself. But here's how an API functions. Imagine you're going to look for a flight or for lodging on your next trip, and you sit down at your computer and you log into one of the travel sites. You do a search with your parameters, it takes that information, and it goes and it checks out all the various travel organizations, airlines, hotels, etc., makes your request known, gathers the information, and brings it back to you. Not unlike a waiter going to the kitchen with your order, placing it, receiving the food, and bringing it back to you. That's an API. And in the internet world, that's magic. So after 3 years, the company, of course, is Amazon, has built an infrastructure that's flexible, scalable, and unlike really anything out there in the world. Not only that, they've got the ability with visibility and control to extend it to third-party infrastructure just like they wanted to. But their vision's gotten even bigger. And so they said, let's back this thing up. We could extend this to developers. We could extend this to other third-party e-commerce sites. We could really do something with this. But even they didn't have a huge vision of where this thing could go to. And eventually, that business launched in 2006, known as AWS, or Amazon Web Services, became the largest cloud and hypercompute infrastructure system in the world, although there are several folks catching up. See, hyperscale. You didn't think I'd get there, but I got there. Hyperscale, hyperscale. Wherefore art thou hyperscale? You know, a lot of folks think that once we got to the Amazon model, that's it, that's hyperscale, and that's actually just one of the 4 types. So we would call that infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. AWS is there, Microsoft, of course, with Azure. In fact, Microsoft, in a report I just read, is actually growing as fast or faster than AWS. Google Cloud Services, IBM Software, there are many, but that business model is hypercompute or infrastructure as a service. That's a form of hyperscale. Some of the other forms of hyperscale are software as a service. You would know that from Salesforce.com or LinkedIn, things like that. It's where you're using their services for HR or professional services or your sales infrastructure, supporting your sales team. Then, of course, there's the social media providers, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Those are all a form of hyperscale. And then lastly, e-commerce sites like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba. All of these are a form of hyperscale because of their size. There's also a revenue model that goes along with those. But one of the interesting things about hyperscale is also their elasticity. In all of those organizations that I just described, you would not expect to go to post a picture or do a search or spin up a machine that you would run into the edge of the internet. I'm going to start a cloud machine in AWS services. Whoop, we're out of storage. Then it's not a hyperscale. Obviously, with Amazon, you wouldn't run out, or Microsoft, or if you go to post something on Facebook, you fully expect to post. These are all descriptors of hyperscale companies. So, who are the hyperscales? We've talked about their attributes. We've talked about the business models. I've got them roughly lumped into three groups. There's the sexy 7, like that. Then there's, of course, the flirty 30, and my all-time favorite, the fluffy 50. So, what's the future? What's the future of hyperscales? What does that look like? I don't know. I love to talk about the future because when you talk about the past, they can look back behind you and fact check you, as my children often do, and my wife. But this is not a fact checking exercise. This is the future. One really cool thing that we think hyperscales go into right now, there's approximately 7 billion people in the world. I know, Ryan, we're not supposed to use specific numbers, but there's about 7 billion people in the world. And less than half of that today has access to the internet. There are tens of billions of devices that have access to the internet. We'll talk about that another time. But here's what's really cool. What's the future of this stuff? Google, for example, with their Project Loon, are creating low Earth orbit balloons so that they can take internet and infrastructure out to parts of the world that don't have it today. We're not going to have to run satellites. We're not going to have to run cabling or ground-based anything. And that's going to be part of hyperscale. When we see augmented reality and virtual reality coming alongside all these iDevices and all of your tablets and all of our infrastructure and our phones, our autonomous vehicles, there's going to be hyperscale. Probably have to come up with a new term. Ginormous scale. Hyperscale. Super hyper? Are these the outtakes? I don't know. In any event, now you've got an idea of what hyperscale is. In one of our future videos, we're going to talk about where hyperscale lives, the mega data center, and all the ancillary data centers that connect to those. Thanks for checking in today. Have a great day.